You think you hate discipline. You tell yourself that's the reason. That's why the alarm goes off and you silence it. That's why the plan gets written and then abandoned. That's why every Sunday night feels like the beginning of something, and every Friday feels like the proof that nothing changed. You think the problem is the hard work, the early mornings, the routine, the sacrifice. But what if discipline was never the problem? What if the real pain doesn't come from the work itself? What if it comes from something deeper? Something quieter, something you've been avoiding for a long time. What if the pain comes from looking in the mirror and no longer trusting the person staring back at you? Because here's the thing most people never say out loud. They don't hate discipline because it's hard. They hate discipline because every time they try to be disciplined, they are reminded of every single time they tried before, and quit, and forgot, and made excuses, and promised again. That's not a hatred of discipline. That's the weight of a broken relationship with yourself. And that is what we are going to talk about today. Think about the first time you made a promise to yourself. Maybe you were younger. Maybe something happened that made you say, enough. This is the moment. I'm going to change. And for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, you meant it. You felt it. The fire was real. And then, something happened. Or nothing happened. And the promise quietly died. You told yourself it was fine. You told yourself you'd start again. And maybe you did. But the second time, it was a little harder to believe yourself. A little harder to feel that fire. Because somewhere in the back of your mind, you remembered what happened the last time. This is where most people misread the situation. They look at the difficulty of discipline and say, I just don't have what it takes. They compare themselves to people who wake up early, who grind through discomfort, who seem unbothered by the resistance that paralyzes everyone else, and they decide that those people are built differently. That discipline is a gift some people have and some people don't. But that's not the truth. The truth is far more uncomfortable and far more empowering. The people who are consistent aren't people who have never failed. They are people who have rebuilt their relationship with themselves, one small action at a time. They are people who stopped making grand declarations and started making quiet commitments and keeping them. The discipline you see in someone else is the result of self-trust they rebuilt, sometimes from ruins just as deep as yours. So let's talk about how that trust gets destroyed in the first place. Because it doesn't happen all at once. That's the part nobody warns you about. The erosion of self-respect is not a single catastrophic moment. It is slow. It is gradual. It happens in the quiet spaces between your intentions and your actions, and most of the time, you don't even notice it's happening. It starts with something small, a goal you set but didn't follow through on, a habit you started but abandoned after a few days, a version of yourself you promised to become but slowly stopped believing in. And each time, the gap between who you say you are and who you actually are grows a little wider. Every time you say I'll start Monday and Monday comes and nothing changes. Your subconscious takes note. Every time you set an alarm and hit snooze, not once, but 5 times, part of your mind registers, this person doesn't do what they say. Every time you open your phone instead of doing the work, every time you choose comfort over commitment, every time you delay and delay and delay, you are teaching yourself something. You are teaching yourself that your word means nothing. Not to the world, not yet, but to the only person who matters in this equation, yourself. And here is where it gets deeply psychological, because the mind is not as forgiving as you think. We walk around believing that our failures are private, that no one sees the broken promises we make to ourselves. And technically, that's true. But you see them. Your nervous system remembers every abandoned goal. Your gut recognizes the familiar feeling of a plan that won't make it past Thursday. Your body knows what it feels like to gear up for change, and then retreat. Again, and over time, something subtle, But devastating happens. You stop believing in your own voice. You stop trusting your own motivation. You start making plans with one hand while your subconscious quietly dismantles them with the other. Because deep down, you don't actually believe this time will be different. That is what low self-respect looks like from the inside. It doesn't always look like self-hatred. Sometimes it looks like procrastination. Sometimes it looks like perfectionism refusing to start unless conditions are perfect so that you never have to risk failing again. Sometimes it looks like distraction, like scrolling instead of working, like choosing the comfort of the present over the possibility of the future. And all of it, every avoidance behavior, every escape, every excuse, is your mind protecting you from the one thing it fears most. The possibility that you might try again, and fail again, and have to feel that disappointment again. Avoidance is not laziness, it is armor. The only problem is that the armor is keeping you from the life you actually want. Now let's go deeper. Because this is where most conversations about discipline stop. They talk about the habits, the routines, the tactics, and those things matter. But they miss the root of why discipline feels so difficult for certain people at certain moments in their life. Discipline doesn't feel hard because the tasks are hard. Discipline feels hard because it is a mirror. Every time you sit down to do the work to train, to study, to build, to create, you are confronted with yourself, with your current level of ability, with the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And if you have a history of abandoning that gap, of walking away from the discomfort of growth, then sitting down to work doesn't just feel physically difficult, it feels emotionally dangerous. Because it reminds you of every time you sat here before and left. Think about the person who wants to get back into training. Physically, the workout might not even be that intense. The body can handle more than we give it credit for. But mentally, they are not just lifting weights or running a distance. They are confronting every time they quit before, every time they started and stopped, every time they looked in the mirror and felt disappointed. And that confrontation is what breaks people before the work even begins. Or think about the person who wants to build something, a business, a skill, a creative project. The actual work might be manageable, an hour of focused effort a day. That's all it takes to build something real over time. But sitting down to do that hour means sitting with the knowledge that they've had this idea before, that they've started this project before, that they've told themselves this time was different before, and it wasn't. So they don't sit down. They find something else to do, something that feels productive without requiring them to be vulnerable. And the project stays unstarted. The version of themselves they could become stays locked behind a wall of shame and avoidance. This is the cycle. And the cycle is not about discipline. The cycle is about a self-image that has been shaped over time, slowly, consistently, by a pattern of self-abandonment. And here's the hardest truth of all. You can read every book on motivation. You can listen to every speech. You can write your goals in every color and pin them to every wall. But none of it will work if you don't address the foundation, if you don't rebuild the thing that all discipline rests on: self-trust. So, how do you rebuild it? Not by thinking differently, not by affirmations, not by imagining yourself transformed, not by visualizing the future version of you while the present version of you hasn't moved from the couch. You rebuild self-trust the same way it was destroyed, one small action at a time. Because here's what nobody tells you about self-respect. It is not something you are given. It is not something you inherit. It is not something you decide to have one morning. It is something you earn, quietly, consistently, through the daily practice of being a person who does what they say they're going to do. The rebuilding does not begin with a massive transformation. It does not begin on January 1st or after a tragedy or when the conditions are finally right. It begins with something almost insultingly small. Wake up when you said you would wake up. That's it. For now, that's it. Not because waking up early is the secret to success, but because you told yourself you were going to do it. And if you do it, if you follow through on even that small, quiet commitment, you have begun to repair something that's been broken for a long time. Your nervous system notices. Your subconscious notices. The part of your mind that tracks whether your word means anything notices. And slowly, something shifts. You make your bed because you said you would. You do the first 10 minutes of work even when you don't feel like it. You show up to the training session even when you're tired. You sit with the discomfort of the difficult task instead of immediately reaching for an escape. Not because you suddenly have unlimited motivation. Not because you've become someone different overnight. But because you are accumulating evidence. And that evidence is more powerful than any speech you will ever hear. The evidence that you can be trusted. Every kept promise is a deposit into an account that has been overdrawn for too long. And at first, the deposits are small. At first, you don't feel very different. The old patterns still pull at you. The urge to quit, to delay, to escape it doesn't disappear overnight. But you do it anyway. You do it even on the days when the motivation is nowhere to be found. You do it even when no one is watching and no one would know if you skipped. You do it because somewhere you've decided that the most important relationship in your life is the one you have with yourself. And that relationship deserves to be taken seriously. This is the hidden architecture of discipline that nobody talks about. It's not about willpower. It's not about being harder on yourself. It's not about punishment. It is about rebuilding a foundation of self-trust so deep, so proven, so consistent, that the voice in your head that whispers you won't actually do this slowly goes quiet. Not because you silenced it with affirmations, but because you buried it under evidence. And here is what begins to happen over time as you rebuild. You start to notice something different about the way you carry yourself. Not in a dramatic, visible way, not at first, but inside. There is a quiet that wasn't there before, a steadiness. When you say you are going to do something, there is less conflict, less internal negotiation, less exhausting back and forth between the part of you that wants to and the part of you that expects to fail. Because that second voice has been proven wrong too many times. The person who begins to emerge from this process is not perfect. They still have hard days. They still experience resistance and doubt and the familiar temptation to quit. But something fundamental has changed. They are no longer afraid of themselves. They used to dread their own plans. They used to look at a goal and feel a quiet anxiety because they knew what it felt like to set a goal and abandon it. They knew the disappointment. They knew the shame. And they wanted to avoid that feeling more than they wanted the goal. But now they have a track record. A small one maybe, but real. And that track record changes everything. Because when you have proven to yourself through action, not words, that you are the kind of person who follows through, the goal stops feeling like a threat. It starts feeling like an inevitability. Not because you're arrogant, not because you think the road will be easy, but because you know what you're made of now. You know, at a cellular level, that when you commit to something, you will find a way. Not out of inspiration, not out of motivation, but out of identity, out of who you have chosen to become. This is what discipline feels like when it's built on a foundation of self-trust. It doesn't feel like punishment. It doesn't feel like fighting yourself. It feels like alignment, like moving in the same direction as your own values. Like the freedom that comes from being exactly who you said you were going to be. And here is the beautiful, irreversible thing that happens once you reach that place. The version of you that once needed the perfect morning, the perfect mood, the perfect conditions to start doesn't exist anymore. Because the person you've become doesn't wait for perfect. They act within imperfect. They know that conditions will rarely be ideal. They know that motivation is a visitor, not a resident. They know that discipline, real discipline, is not the absence of difficulty. It is the decision to move forward in the presence of it. So, who are you becoming? Not the version of you that sets big goals on Sunday night and abandons them by Wednesday. Not the version that needs the speech, the song, the playlist, the perfect moment to get started. Not the version that is at war with itself every single day. You are becoming something quieter and something far more dangerous. You are becoming reliable to yourself. And that single quality, that single underrated, undervalued quality changes everything. Because a person who is reliable to themselves is a person who can build anything, who can endure anything, who does not need to be rescued by motivation. Because they don't run on motivation anymore. They run on commitment. They run on identity. They run on the simple, unshakable knowledge that they are the kind of person who does what needs to be done. Not because it's easy, not because they always want to, but because that's who they are now, and no one can take that from them. The goal was never to be perfect. The goal was never to become a machine, to feel nothing, to push through everything with robotic indifference. That was never what this was about. The goal was always simpler than that. The goal was to become someone you can trust again. To look in the mirror and feel something other than disappointment. To make a promise to yourself and know not hope, not wish, but know that you will keep it. To wake up in the morning and not have to fight yourself just to begin. To live inside a body and a mind that are working together instead of against each other. That is what self-respect feels like. Not pride, not arrogance, not the need to announce your transformation to the world, just quiet confidence. The deep, unspoken knowledge that you are someone who shows up for yourself every day. Even when it's hard, even when no one is watching. Even when the old patterns try to pull you back, because you've made a decision, a real one, not a declaration, not a post, not a promise that will be forgotten by next week. A decision about who you are, and every day you live in alignment with that decision, you become more of that person, more grounded, more capable, more free. The discipline that once felt like prison becomes the structure that sets you free. Because freedom, real freedom, is not the ability to do nothing. Real freedom is the ability to do exactly what you said you were going to do, without the chains of self-doubt and fear and broken promises dragging you backward. Real freedom is the morning that comes when you no longer have to convince yourself to be who you want to be. Because you already are. The day you stop breaking promises to yourself is the day discipline stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like coming home. If this reached something in you, if some part of what was said today reflected something you've been carrying silently, then leave this comment below. I choose self-respect, not for anyone else, for you, as a declaration, as the beginning of a new track record, one that starts today.